Welcome to the Come Home podcast, where we connect with experts, leaders, researchers, and advocates dedicated to excelling in education, emotional intelligence, human development, and social impact. Together, we explore the world of human potential, sharing insights, experiences, and the transformative work happening in these fields. I'm Griffin Gervais, founder of Come Home, where we partner with educational organizations and institutions to revolutionize education through emotional intelligence. On this podcast, our mission is to inspire, educate, and empower listeners to leverage emotional intelligence for personal growth and collective impact. Today, I am honored to be joined by David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly, a national leader in social emotional learning. David began his work with UA in 2014, where he developed the Resilient Scholars Program, now serving schools across the country. Under his leadership, the Urban Assembly has become a model for school innovation and equity in public education. David is a Crain's 40 Under 40 honoree, a Champion of Equity Award recipient, and serves on the board of CASTLE. He is also the author of The Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence and co-author of Challenges to Integrating Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programs in Organizations. Beyond education, he is a civil affairs officer in the Army Reserve and holds a master's in educational psychology from Fordham University. David, welcome to the Come Home podcast.
Irvin, it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I'm really excited. You and I had a quick second to just chat and kind of loop into the conversation. The Urban Assembly, the work you've been committed to doing, is just something that aligns with me, aligns with my values and what I believe to be true and needed within education. And so I'm really excited to dive in with you to discuss SEL and really its impact. Really take it broad, but then also trickle it down to what are the boots on the ground work happening in order to progress and move this work forward. So really looking forward to that. One of the questions I start with every single guest when they hop on, my company's called Come Home. My podcast is called the Come Home Podcast. The work is around emotional intelligence, social and emotional learning. When you hear the words come home, what does that mean to you?
Well, first, we got to recognize what a home is, right?
Mm,
A home is a house that has memories in it. It's a place that is familiar. It's a place that we connect to. Um, and it's a place that allows us to be grounded in culture and language and food, you know,
mm,
come home, David, or come home, Griffin, come home to this
yeah.
place that connects you. And so when I think about coming home, I think about a place that helped each of us develop our sense of selves.
Mm,
Um, and I love that notion. I think about the prodigal son from the Bible.
mhm,
This notion of like the prodigal son has returned, right? And praise
yeah.
be. So that's what I think about. Coming home is a place where we're connected back to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things in the work that I've done on myself, and with people in education, whether that be teachers or leaders, is really this idea of when we talk about emotional intelligence, when we talk about social and emotional learning, one of the things that it really is about this true embodiment around how well we know ourselves and how that integrates into the world. And it's this perfect balance between deep rooted, like you said, like the deep foundational aspect of it. But then we also know how that shows up outside of us. And
Hmm.
we're able to play that back and forth game because we've cultivated those skills to stay in integrity, to stay in our
Hmm.
beliefs. Amazing. Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So
Okay,
let's talk all things SEL.
let's do
I
it.
know it's a hot topic. It's a topic that's in this world right now is very polarizing. You have some.
Is it polarizing, Griffin? All right, we'll talk more.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get
I think it's less polarizing in its specifics than it is in its abstract, but we'll talk more.
perfect. And so what we see, right, and at least from my perspective, and I want to hear yours as well, but what we see is districts, states, schools really either taking it on and really making it their own to say, hey, this is important to us, or it's we can't use this, or we can use bits and pieces of these aspects, and we can't go there. And so there's this interesting dynamic that's happening with these skills and
Mhm.
this work. And so what I ultimately want to do, and I know your brain's already firing and you're ready to dive into the conversation. And so I want to start really broad. And for people listening and for people tuning into this, I really want to bring some understanding to what the term social and emotional learning means.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'd love to ask you that to start, and we can kind of go from there. So, in the work that you've done and the work UA is committed to doing, when you guys talk social and emotional learning, what does that actually mean?
Well, first, Griffin, let's just break down the words, right? It's learning in the social and emotional domain of functioning. So learning is the active acquisition of knowledge or skills.
Mm-hmm.
Social, how we interact with others. Emotional, how we interact with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is social emotional learning but the active acquisition of skills around interpersonal and intrapersonal problem solving?
Mm-hmm.
The outcome of social and emotional learning is social and emotional competence, right? When we learn social and emotional learning, when we acquire social emotional learning skills,
Mm-hmm.
we are social and emotionally competent. Now, we can learn social and emotional skills throughout a variety of settings and a variety of spaces. We can learn them from our parents, and we do. When our parents teach us how to regulate and co-regulate when we're young kids, and when our
Mm-hmm.
parents teach us how to use our words, that's the emotional space. When our parents teach us how to share and interact, that's the social space.
Mm-hmm.
We can learn it in schools and in sports. I mean, you think about personal responsibility, you talk about um, things like responsible decision making.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the active acquisition of these skills happen because they are directly taught, reinforced, and then practiced by young people across institutions so that they can demonstrate social and emotional competence. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what social and emotional learning is. And the result of that is young people who can solve interpersonal and intrapersonal problems constructively and thrive in our society.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, and I love the, and I think something that I think is sort of blurred sometimes is, um, right, we start to think that it has to happen in one particular place, right? It either
Hmm.
happens at the home or it happens in the school. And right, if we actually start to peel those layers apart, we can learn that it actually is happening at all times. It's
Hmm.
happening all around us. It's happening with our own emotional regulation, like you were saying. It's happening when we're developing relationships with other people, when we're
Hmm.
making decisions, whether that's related to school, career, relationships, how we're showing up in the world. Like these are all actual skill sets. And I think the piece that we're starting to really notice is we have to cultivate those time and time again. It's a muscle. These are all
Hmm.
little muscles that we're talking about. Responsible decision making, the ability to regulate, the ability to manage. All of these things are tiny little muscles that we need the gym, right? We
Mm.
need to be able to actively practice and work on
Yeah.
in order to make sure those are strong.
Well, so Griffin, I come from an educational psychology background, right?
Okay.
And one of the key concepts in educational psychology is that learning infers a change in behavior, right?
Mm,
When you learn something, it's demonstrated through some sort of behavioral outcome, right?
mhm,
So if I learn how to uh, hit a ball, which is a skill,
mhm,
right? It's a psychomotor skill. Comes through practice, right? Integrating vision in our muscles. Uh, the way that I can demonstrate that I've learned to do that is my ability to consistently perform that behavior or skill, particularly under different conditions of stress and emotionality, right?
mhm.
So social and emotional learning is essentially just learning about things in the social and emotional domain, right?
Yeah.
Myself, social, outcomes, emotion, and management. So we can self-awareness, social awareness, right? Self-management, social management. Those are the skills that fall into those categories. And
Yeah.
again, when we learn these things, we
Hmm.
then demonstrate social and emotional competence, which is the expectation for most members of our society. And I just want to name that, right?
Yeah.
This is everything between your meerkats need social and emotional learning to your most advanced society of hundreds of millions of people across the world. In
Yeah.
order to get along with people, you need to know how to manage oneself and
Mm.
how to relate with others. And that process by which we learn those things is called social and emotional learning.
Yeah. I love that. Like, so important, and I like the language you use too. I think you make it very simplistic in the way that you describe it, and very uh, easily to digest, right? Because I think
Mhm.
sometimes, especially educators, and we could throw out these terms and we can start talking where a lot of people can't wrap their head around it, or it doesn't seem tangible, right?
Mhm.
And that's a
Mhm.
lot of what I'm committed to doing, and I know you guys are as well, is let's make this actionable. Let's make this sustainable. Let's make this practical to your life. And so
Mhm.
I love the way that you're describing it. Let's now go back to what you were saying before when you were like, wait a second, I don't really know about the polarization side of it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think you and I can both agree in what you just described, you and I can sit here and go, well, yeah, everyone would want this, right? Every person would want this for themselves. Every family member would want it for other people around them. Every organization and industry would want their people to have it. Like, why would you not want to have it? Yet
Mhm.
there's this pull in our education system around, well, where does this exist? How does it
Mhm.
exist? What does it
Mhm.
look like? And so I
Mhm.
want to give you
Mhm.
space to go back to what you were saying before.
Mhm. Well, let's take a moment to think about these ideas, right?
Mhm.
Um, every time you work in a group, you are learning how to collaborate, or at least you're
Mhm.
activating your collaboration skills, right? Or your relationship skills. Under those relationship skills, we have a number of requisite skills, right? How well
Sure.
you listen, how well you paraphrase, how well you take turns. I mean, I don't know about you, Griffin, but sometimes I see a span of people's relationship skills and things like Thanksgiving meals, all the way to like staff meeting, right?
Sure.
And so those skills that fall under relationship skills, but are collaboration skills and listening skills, and are in a social management kind of context, impact our ability to solve problems in groups.
Mm,
And the more effective we are solving problems in groups using diverse perspectives, the more novel and innovative our solutions can be. And this is not
sure.
like David Adams. This is just like research science,
Sure.
right? That diverse perspectives help create innovative solutions because you can see the problem from different sets.
Hmm.
So, no matter what you are doing, if you put young people in groups, you're activating their social emotional skills. Now, young people have different levels of social and emotional competence, right,
Absolutely.
within that group.
Hmm.
And so, how are we ensuring that young people have the requisite skills they need to be successful, not only in school, but in life? When you go
Hmm.
to work in an organization, an industry, you are mostly working with other people, right? You're not usually doing your own projects by yourself. That collaboration matters. So it's hard for me to believe that we don't want to teach people how to collaborate with each other. Let's talk about
Absolutely.
civic society. We have people from diverse backgrounds and diverse perspectives, and we need to come up with a social contract that allows people to see themselves across a range of issues. If you're a
Hmm.
mayor, if you're a city council member, if you're a governor, you need to be able to work with people across different diverse perspectives to come to some sort of consensus. This is
Hmm.
collaboration. This is
Yeah.
this is social management. Why or how could we build a society that's focused on governance and self-governance and participatory democracy if we don't teach people how to collaborate across difference? We all
Hmm.
have different opinions, right? And so how do
Sure.
we get to that place? How do we teach people how to disagree constructively?
Mm.
And again, let's talk about the criminal justice system. If you have challenges managing your emotions and disagreeing constructively, you will have relational problems that will either land you in therapy and or the criminal justice system at the highest issue or severity of that concern.
Hmm.
So we hold our young people accountable to social and emotional competence, right, as part and parcel of what it means to participate in our society. But then when the question comes, right, well, who should teach this? The pushback is like parents, only parents. But like
Hmm.
kids don't live in similar context. We all have a vested interest in ensuring that it doesn't matter who your mom is, doesn't matter who your dad, it doesn't matter how your upbringing is, that you can
Mhm.
participate in our society. That means you know how to collaborate when you go to work. You know how to manage your emotions. You know how to communicate effectively. If I were a woman or a man who wants to be in a relationship, I would also have a vested interest in developing
Sure.
these kinds of skills, right? And so the controversialness of social and emotional learning is because folks have been focused on this very broad notion of what it means to do social and emotional learning, right? As opposed
Mm,
to this idea of raise your hand if you do not want your child to make good decisions throughout their life. That's something I would like for every child. Not just
absolutely.
because we are living in community, but because children become adults, right?
Yeah.
And I want adults who make good decisions because that's a good place to live. I want to be in a town where everybody has developed social and emotional competence because that town is safe. That's a town where people are thriving. That's a town where mental health challenges are not overcoming our youth and our adults. That's a town where we
Mhm.
can have civic development and civic participation. That's a town where if I have to sit on a jury, I trust my other jurors are taking in information and collaborating it to pass judgment on our fellow society. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about social and emotional learning. And I have not yet met one person who has said these are not skills that are fundamental to our society and fundamental to what it means in terms of our public school system.
Yeah, 100%, right? If we were to sit there and have conversations with students, family members, just the community at large, and say to them, who would want our future students and current people to be productive members of society, making great impact, every hand would go up, right? We wouldn't want that for other people. So I think it's so important. One of the things I think about is when I hear that, when I think about how our society has already set things up in a response to these social and emotional skills, right? And really everything we do is rooted foundationally in these skills. How do we start to actually paint a picture? How do we start to tell a story, and really have people understand the impact of the evolution of what education needs to look like? Because I think in what I've learned in over time, and maybe you've seen this specifically within the school setting, is it'll be this piece that lives on the side. It'll be this social and emotional time. It'll
Mhm.
be this kind of living separately from what the reality and day to day is. What is UA doing? What are you guys committed to doing to really start to transform that? Because it's less about this is a program or this is an initiative. It's about no, 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 no. We have this research, we have this understanding now. We actually have to transform the way that we're operating. That's
Mhm.
completely different than this certain piece.
Well, I think the idea here goes back to the notion that we are always activating social and emotional skills in
Yeah.
interactions with ourselves and others, right? If I am doing math, writing, and working through productive struggle or the zone of proximal development, I
Mhm.
am pulling on my self-management skills. If I set a
Absolutely.
goal, I am learning how to use long-term self-regulation in order to motivate me. If I am working in a group and having discussion, I'm using my communication skills. And
Mm,
what's happening is that like we are not setting our kids up for the kinds of success that they could have if we put them in situations that activate social emotional competence without teaching social emotional skills,
sure.
right? Like if I go out into the world and I am expected to do something, but have not had the opportunity to learn it, but
Hmm.
somebody else has, then that's putting me as a disadvantage. So at the
Mm,
UA, we look at the 5 domains of school life. We look at instructional practice, social emotional supports, behavioral supports, extracurricular activities, and adults. And think about like where do these social and emotional competencies live? Where do they sit? How are they being
sure.
taught? How are they being reinforced? How do students have language so they don't have
Yeah,
to guess, right? Let's go self-regulation.
sure.
If you don't have a parent who narrates their self-regulatory process that says, I'm feeling really frustrated, self-awareness. I'm going to take a second to calm down and take a breath, self-regulation, right? Model that for their kids. Most students or most kids learn about emotional regulation through the demonstration of things like anger or frustration,
Hmm.
right? So most kids learn that when you are angry, you act angry.
Sure.
That's because it's you don't have insights into other people's minds, right? Like maybe Griffin, you did a great job at self-regulating, but you didn't tell anybody by it. So like if you're a kid, you're just like, all right, he's not angry because he's not hitting. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
fact, like you can feel a thing and not act out that behavior, which is like every second grade. It's like, guys, you can feel a thing, but don't have to act out the behavior, right?
Yeah.
But this is a foundational notion, and that is what
Sure.
we expect from our adults in society. We expect our
Yeah.
adults to be able to feel a thing and not have to act it out. You can have a thought and not say it. I'm telling you, these are notions that are revolutionary to young people who have not been through a social and emotional kind of development space, right? So
Mm.
when we teach social emotional skills, we teach these fundamental things about how to recognize our emotions, how to understand our external supports, how to develop a
Hmm.
sense of personal responsibility, how to set and achieve goals, how to calm down, how to resolve conflicts constructively, our role in the greater society and wanting to contribute to that society in terms of social management. And then we put out young people who are prepared to do the things that society asks us to do. So
Yeah.
again, it is not fair to ask people to do things and then not teach them to do it. We teach
Sure.
driver's ed in schools because we expect people to learn how to drive cars in our society, but we don't teach social emotional learning because that's not what we do in schools. It makes no sense. It makes
Yeah.
no sense. We can find time for driver's ed, we can find time for social emotional learning.
Absolutely. And even when you're describing that and just thinking about it, and I think every person listening and tuning in can relate to this, these aren't new things. We're not talking about anything new, right? What I heard and what you were saying was we're actually bringing language. We're actually bringing intentionality to the teaching, right? The ability to collaborate, the ability to regulate, the ability to be motivated, all of these different things. That's just always existed. But instead of letting that bypass and letting that go, we're bringing some specifics to it, the language, the instruction around it, equipping people with the skills to ultimately be able to put those pieces together to go, wait a second, okay, I was frustrated, but now I'm feeling good, and now I'm feeling a little bit motivated. What was that actual process that I went
That's right.
through?
That's right. And at the very least, I mean, we've all been to school, had a group project, and somebody didn't do their work, and the teacher was like, "All right, you get a F or you get a D on an assignment," and then we all move on with our lives. But like no, what if we cared so much about like collaboration that we were actually like, "Hey, no." You're not just going to be graded on how well you collaborated. You're going to be taught what it means to collaborate as opposed to
Mm,
just be corrected if you don't do it well. In the military, right, we care about teamwork and we select for folks who can work as a team as part of the warrior
mm,
ethos. That's how much we care that for that in society as well, but it's all kind of amorphous. It's all kind of like ancillary to the thing that you think you're supposed to do, which is get a good grade on this assignment. In the real world, right, the
yeah,
assignment grade is how well you guys solve problems collectively, right?
sure.
And the product that you guys put out as a group. If in the real world somebody doesn't do any part of their work and they get a D or an F, they're not a helpful employee. That person is getting fired.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
let's not wait till people need to fail to develop the skills that are going to be the key things that define us as a society and helps each individual thrive.
Mm. Being proactive, right? We're getting it. Whether we're looking at education and industry or the
Yes.
justice system, right? We're getting the responses. My random scratching my head day to day is the the percentages are out there, the results are out there, the information need to make changes out there.
Hmm.
So what's actually going to make the change happen? Like what is that thing? How do we evolve so that education becomes this proactive space rather than constantly being reactive? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if you have any kind of insights into, what might that piece be? Because I sit here and I go, okay, well, our industry is giving us feedback.
Mm,
Our justice system is giving us
that's
feedback.
right.
Our
That's right.
educators are giving us feedback. Listen, folks, the students are even giving us feedback. They're talking. What does it actually take for us to be proactive in making this a priority?
Well, look, here in New York State, the Blue Ribbon Commission, led by the Board of Regents, has established a portrait of a graduate for New York State students. And part of
Mm,
that portrait of the graduate says they expect students to be social and emotionally competent. We have 24 states across the country that have guidelines and standards around social and emotional competence. And the goal here is not to be like, Griffin, you're going to get an F because you can't share. The goal here is to say the same thing we do when we put driver's ed into our schools is
yeah,
we need people who can negotiate the roads so that they're not a danger to themselves and others, and we can
sure.
teach it in school. So, and we need
Yeah,
people who can negotiate society so they're not a danger to themselves and others, and we can teach it in school. I just,
yeah.
I don't see this as controversial at all, right?
I don't
Because
either.
if you need a license and to pass a test to drive a 2,000 pound vehicle because
Mhm.
it's a big responsibility, then let's just take some time to do the same thing with who we
Yeah,
are as people, with who we
sure.
are as people. So we have guidelines, we have shifts now in terms of what the public school system needs to do. Now, there's going to be pushback. People say, well, if it's not reading, if it's not writing, if it's not math, right, it doesn't matter. Good thing is that social emotional competence contributes to high quality reading math scores, right? Social
Mhm,
emotional competence contributes to things like reduction of suspensions and increasing in attendance. Social
mhm.
emotional competence contributes to the kinds of things that schools are traditionally asked to produce with regards to academic outcomes. So
Yeah,
it's not an either or conversation. This is not
sure.
a 15 minutes of social emotional learning takes away from 20 minutes of math. The fact of the matter is anybody who's ever learned anything knows that there's a social and emotional dimension to that learning. And when students are better equipped to manage their emotions, to collaborate, to communicate, they're better equipped to learn. And
Mhm.
just so happens, better equipped for employees, better equipped to navigate society effectively, less likely to use drugs, less likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. The
Yeah,
savings of this is phenomenal. We're
yeah.
talking about 11 to 1 return in investment with regards
Wow.
to what society saves when we develop social, emotionally competent people. So
Yeah,
this is what we need to do. We need to stop kind of figuring out and finding reasons why we can't get it done. This is not a question of I'm teaching something at home and you're teaching something in school. We need to work with our parents, work with our communities, because
absolutely.
we all care about kids who make good choices. I'm talking about, Griffin, stop, think, and act. Do we want young people who just act on impulse, or do we want people who can make good decisions under
Mhm.
conditions of stress and emotionality? I'm talking about
Mhm.
senses of personal responsibility, ability to set and achieve goals. I'm talking about resolving conflict constructively. Let's just
Yeah,
reverse this. Let's just play a game.
sure.
Instead of social emotional competence, let's just do the opposite, right? So, do we want people who resolve conflicts with violence? Do we want young
Mm.
people who have no sense of responsibility, who don't know how to manage themselves or another, who
Mhm.
communicate poorly, who don't know understand their emotions of themselves or others? Because that's what we're going to have unless we develop these young people in our schools effectively across the board. It's
Yeah,
not fair to say, you know, my parents teach me these things and my parents don't, because we're holding
sure.
everybody to that same standard at the end of the day with regards to operating in society.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not one of those things where you integrate into the real world or you find yourself in jobs or, the justice system and it's like, well, my family didn't teach me that.
That's
And they're like, "Oh, well, you get a pass then," right? It's like, no,
There you
there's
go.
there's this responsibility
There you go.
that when you're in those situations, when you're interacting in the world, you're held to a certain standard of
That's right.
how you need to operate. And I've been able to develop relationships with a lot of people within industries who are leading in those industries as well, and they're constantly saying to me, "They're Griffin, I can't hire because they don't have these skills." And we're not talking about tactical, right? We're
Mhm.
talking about they can't collaborate, they can't communicate effectively, they can't. all this stuff. And
Don't persevere.
they can't yeah, can't persevere. The other piece to it too is, Griffin, I can't promote this person. I
Hmm.
can't actually put them in this leadership position because they don't know how to collaborate. They
Hmm.
don't know how to actively listen. They don't know how to actually take someone's perspective and support them. What do we do? And so that's where it's like we're already holding people responsible to know these things. It's our duty as public educators, as the
That's right.
education system to go, all right, what do we have to do? So let's
And
so
the answer is teach it. Like it's really not that
yeah,
complicated, right?
it's
Like,
not. It's not. It's not. So let's go to that piece then, because I think right, the understanding of social and emotional learning, a lot around what we notice, right, the impacts of it, the importance of it. I think we've been able to touch on that, but let's now bring it to what it actually looks like within a school,
okay.
right? So we're talking about, and you just named it. We just have to teach it
Hmm.
in currently in the schools that you guys support. What are some of the biggest needs that have to be addressed in order to allow teaching to start effectively happening?
Such a good question, right? So in schools, everything is logistics. All right.
Mhm,
All answers or all problems are answered by this question of logistics and planning. So when you're developing a high quality social emotional learning program, there are three elements to it. One is you need to teach it the skill.
mhm,
Two, students need to have an opportunity to practice with feedback.
mhm.
And then three, you need to be able to generalize that skill under different kind of contexts,
Sure.
right? So let's just talk about uh, a, a, a communication skills, and um, let's talk about paraphrasing, active listening. You talked about this,
Okay.
right? So you might learn how to listen effectively, right?
Mhm,
What I hear you saying is, let me say that back, right? In your instructional context, you might use turn and talks to activate your
mhm,
social and emotional skill, right? And then you may have an exit ticket that says, well, how well did Griffin listen in your turn and talk today?
mhm,
And so you have that feedback mechanism, right?
mhm,
And when you do that, then students are starting to get clear about what it is that they're learning, making the implicit explicit, right?
mhm,
And demonstrating these techniques effectively. You might, for example, put students in a group, looking at instructional practices again, right? First, we've taught how to resolve conflicts effectively, right? We're putting students in a group having different perspectives in that group. Students are then activating their listening skills, relationship skills, they're activating their problem solving skills, they're activating their negotiation skills, right? And
mhm,
then as an assessment space, well, how well did we do solving problems when we had different perspectives in that space? And when
mhm,
students get consistent feedback, that their social and emotional competence is important, then they learn to value these things in different ways.
mm,
It turns out that I go to school not just with my brain, but with my whole self, right? And that the feedback that I'm receiving about the way that I saw problems in groups, the way that I saw problems interpersonally and interpersonally, is going to set
mm.
me up for success in the real world because in the real world, those things really matter a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember being in a classroom and I asked students like, "Hey, what kind of problems do you guys solve?" And they're like, "We got math problems, sir. Or we got math problems. We got two plus two, you know." And I was like, "Do you guys ever have like non-math problems?" They're like, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." And I was like, "Maybe problems with other people." They're like, "Oh yeah, we got a lot of problems with other people." I'm like,
Every
"Wow,
day at recess.
yes, yeah, yeah. But how do you learn how to solve those problems?" And they're just like, "Why? I mean, we get in trouble." And this is the
Mm,
point. The only way that our system right now, when it's devoid of active social emotional development or active
mm,
social emotional learning, solves problems is by correcting students who are struggling in the social emotional domain, which again,
sure.
even first of all, it's a waste of time. Just teach it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And certainly it's a waste of resources and money because now we are using time to correct and develop the highest need students rather than just giving everybody an opportunity to learn how to resolve conflict, how to work with each other, and how
Yeah.
to be members of society.
Yeah. And we have to start thinking about it just the way that we look at academic instruction, right? Every student gets exposed to math skills.
That's right.
Every student gets exposed to reading and writing curriculum, whatever that may be. What happens is the teacher takes that feedback, the teacher looks across the board and figures out, okay, where are these students on the spectrum? And then what needs do we have, how do we individualize this to make sure that David and Griffin, whoever it is, are getting the support through this academic lens in order to help them progress forward and grow and develop? That's the
This is
exact same thing. It has to be tier one.
It's the value, and you just said it right, tier one. It's the value of this notion that part of my responsibility as a public institution is to produce young people who can contribute to the public, right?
Mhm.
Again, I'm in the military, so like I ran basic training for 3 years, and this
Okay.
was very obvious to us in basic training. We needed to take civilians and turn them into soldiers, folks who can operate in military life and understand the parameters of what that means. We need to take young people and uplift them into citizens of our society. And that
Mm.
means developing their social emotional skills. Now, I think about this as the jury test, right? We all, I don't know, I haven't been on a jury, I've been served, but I haven't actually had to go. But wait, the United States has the most robust jury system out of any country in the world. We use juries for more things, for more reasons than any other country. And part of this is our belief that our fellow citizens are the
Mhm.
best adjudicators of justice, right?
Mm.
And now we've gone up and down in our ability to execute on that, but we're working on it. And so I think about this, like, what would it take to sit on a jury trial and be successful in determining the guilt or innocence of a fellow citizen, right?
Mhm.
Would you need to be able to take an evidence? There's the academic. Somebody says scientific stuff. You'd have at least a basis of what people are talking
Sure.
about, right? You need to be able to read and write and do all that good stuff. But also, you need to be able to be like, sit in a room and come to a consensus, right? That
Mhm.
this is beyond a jury or beyond a reasonable doubt. Or 100% of people said, no, this person is guilty. This person is innocent. That
Mm.
process is what is expected of every single citizen in our country. And
Yeah.
that's why we use that jury process. So let's make sure that our young people are equipped to go into that
Mm.
space and understand how to work together to find a solution with regards to guilt and innocence. And so that's how I think about this stuff, right, Griffin?
Yeah.
It's like we don't need to wait for somebody to fail to set them up for success. Every young person is going to have to do something with jury. Every young person is going to have some sort of employment. Every young person is going to have some sort of relationship. Let's teach them what we know about how to do that well.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on, and I'm right with you on that. And the other piece of it too, for me, and what I've noticed, and why such a commitment for me has been on the adults, is we can give, the best skills or the best resources and tools to students, but then you can go in one classroom and it look one way, and then you go in another classroom and it looks a completely different way. And so really that same process that you were talking about with students, we also have to do the same thing with the adults, because we're also talking about, teachers talking about, I'm afraid of what they're going to say, or
Mm,
or the aspect of power and control. Like what happens when I open that up, and
mhm.
so much support and sustainability also has to come through that development and on the adult side.
But let's take a second on this, right? So
Yeah,
even if I just want to be a highly effective educator in terms of transmitting knowledge or information from a teacher to a student, which is the lowest bar, but let's just say that's what I want to
sure.
do, right? I'm still activating my social emotional skills. Griffin, you
Yeah,
said, right, well, I'm scanning the room. All right, well, that is using my social perception cue, right? I'm
sure.
looking for student cues. And students tell me all the time, they can tell a difference between a teacher who's tuned out of their
Oh yeah.
engagement and student teachers who are tuned in. We all remember that teacher who's like,
Yeah.
David, you look like you're struggling. Like, yeah, I am. Thanks for paying attention, Griffin, right? Let's look at our misconceptions. I'm reading the
Yeah.
work. Looks like David thought this, right? But the goal was that. That's perspective taking, attending to misconceptions, right?
Yeah.
When I'm feeling, yeah, I don't know, you work with kids and they're just not getting it, you're like, and you're like, all right, let me do this another way.
Sure.
That's managing your emotions, right? Because
Yeah.
like it feels frustrating when you're trying to get a concept across and the kid's just not getting it, right?
Yeah.
And so how teachers manage their emotion has a lot to do with how students receive that instruction in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about like the basic, I am just trying to teach, right? Great
Yeah.
teachers are activating social emotional competencies all the time, all
Absolutely.
the time. And young people know the difference between a highly effective teacher and a not, mostly because of how well they are paying attention to the social cues, the misconceptions, how well they're managing the class, how well they're organizing experiences from students' points of view so they connect it. All those things are social emotional competencies. So it's not even a question to me of like, hey, I just want to teach SEL or I want to be a good teacher. If you are a good teacher, you're probably using your social emotional competencies to a higher level than you might suggest.
Yeah. Yeah, and those teachers, right? Those teachers who just are either innately doing it or have a little bit of background or education around it, they're also modeling, right?
Hmm.
Because like I think you were spot on when you said that. Like our students are constantly in our children, in our world. It's not just the constructs of school. It's in our world. Our children are highly observant. They're
Yes.
highly moldable. They're sponges. And so they're constantly watching and to have people in your lives, whether that be parent, whether that be teacher who's actually able to model those things for you and put language to it is just in is showing you how you can develop those skills over time. The other piece, David, I just wanted to make sure I point it out for people tuning in because I think it's really, really important. The entire time you've been talking about these skills and we've been talking about it in the context of school and everything, one of the things I want to make sure I'm pointing out to people is everything that you're saying isn't about this extra or added thing. It's about developing from within all what already exists. You're
Mm-hmm.
talking about exit tickets. You're talking about really just straight on teaching practices. You're talking about navigating problem solving. Everything that you're doing is already happening day in and day out. And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the important pieces because I know how important it is to make sure we're tying these things to academics, but also tying them to this understanding that this isn't this new thing. It's
Hmm.
about developing from what already exists and what already is going on.
I mean, I can't say anything more. That's it. When you do it well, you are giving students opportunities to practice skills that matter. And the reason why social emotional skills matter so much is because they're foundational skills that apply to a range of different domains and contexts,
Mhm.
right? Learning how to make good decisions helps you do your homework at night, but also helps you to make good choices around drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
These foundational skills touch so much of our lives. We have to give students an opportunity. It would be educational malpractice to not give young people the opportunity to develop these competencies, given that they touch so many things. It's kind of like literacy to me. Um,
Yeah.
we cannot organize schools that don't focus on reading and literacy because so much of our lives require reading and literacy to thrive. And
Mhm.
so when a young person comes into the classroom and they're required to work in a group or project,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to work in a group or project, and then we give them a bad grade and say, figure it out next time. We're not setting that young person up for
No.
success. We're not setting that young person up for society. And we can do better, and we should.
Yeah. Yeah. I have this very optimistic vision that one day, sooner than later, we'll have students who, if you go up to a girl named Kelsey and you say, "Hey, Kelsey, you're a third grader in the state of New York. You just moved here from California. Do you guys read?" And she looks at you with this, like you have 40 heads, and she's like, "Of course, it's school. What do you mean I read?" I have that same vision for when it comes to these skills around social and emotional learning. Hey, Kelsey, I know you just moved to New York from California. In third grade, are you guys working on collaboration? Well, yeah, duh. It's third grade. Like, why would we not be working on collaboration? So I
Yeah,
have that vision. I know you guys over at UA believe the same thing. And
100%.
a lot of what you're talking about is really supporting those students in being able to develop those skills. I want to ask you one last thing before we
Sure.
start to
Yeah.
wrap this up. Um, in the work I've done, it's coming through the support of the adults in order to make sure that the students are getting everything that you and I are talking about. some of the things that they share with me is, can we focus on us? Like, can we start to, sure, we're looking at student impact and we're looking at outcomes for students, but outcomes for adults, right? So much. I've had teachers that I've worked with and leaders that I've worked with for who've been in the industry forever, and they get this new like just this new spark and this new like excitement about learning and teaching again. I'm curious from what you guys have done, what are some of the outcomes and the impacts you've noticed from the adults who are working with those students?
Well, I've got so many stories from so many teachers who are like, look,
I know.
uh, this focus on relationship skills has helped me and my husband and my wife.
Yeah.
Um, You said something that is really important,
Okay.
intentionality and language. I'm going to add
Mhm.
practice to that. But like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
we take anything from this conversation, it's intentionality, do it on purpose,
Hmm.
right? Name the things that you're doing, all right,
Absolutely.
and then give students an opportunity to practice these things.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing for our adults, right?
Yeah.
We know that high quality social and emotional skills lead to high quality classrooms for adults, right?
Mm.
We
Yep.
know that pretending to listen to a kid when they tell you the 55,000th time around Dragon Ball Z is like, like that takes skill and it takes energy, right? So
Absolutely.
like when we name those things, you're like, all right, so why is teaching such an emotionally draining profession? Because you're constantly tuning in to people around you, right? And
Mm.
responding and adapting to their needs with your own energy, right?
Sure.
And so if we're clear with that, it gives people a sense of language. I'll leave us with this idea, right? Like I've heard that when people have a sickness and they don't know what it is,
Hmm.
and they go online and they finally get a diagnosis from a doctor or they're part of a community, it's not necessarily that like the naming of it is related to a cure. Sometimes there is no cure, but that
Sure.
sense that you are not alone, there's that sense
Mm.
that there is a larger group of folks who have a similar kind of challenge as you do. It gives people a lot of grace, a lot of
Mm.
sense of solace. And so when we name things, right, we give people a notion that there is a larger world out there
Hmm.
that they can tap into.
Yeah.
Um, and then when we give folks the opportunity to be intentional about developing these things that we name, then we teach, all right, well, it is important for the things
Sure.
that we're doing. And then when we give young people and teachers an opportunity to practice these things,
Hmm.
we give them the chance to develop without necessarily having to fail, right? Because you're not
Yeah.
necessarily in front of a classroom um, when you're practicing these things, although often you are. So the on the adult side of the house, it's intentionality, it's naming things, it's practicing things so that we have an ability to develop our adults, who then develop our kids, who then become
Hmm.
our adults. And I think there's a cat in the cradles and a silver spoon song written there. But that's what we do in the education space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you tied that together perfectly. And just to add to that, I think one of the things as well that I think we're talking about and we're touching on is, sure, you grow your competence around it, and sure, you grow your capacity to navigate these as life goes and as reps go and you get practice and intentionality. This idea of mastery, though, I think we can kind of stick to the side and understand that this is just a lifelong development and habit over time. We're going
Mhm.
to have new experiences, we're going to have new things that we have to navigate in our life. And it's just how well we can continue to access those pieces, and just really commit to being in that rather than I got to get to mastery of blank.
Well, let's just take baseball for example, right? A really good hitter hits like 30, right? 30% of the time.
Hmm.
Um, because you got curveballs, you got screwballs, you got the sun in your eyes, right? These are the best hitters of all time who spent all of their career learning how to hit balls, right? And about
Hmm.
30% of the time they hit it. Nobody asks a professional baseball player what happened to the other 70%, right?
Yeah.
Life is coming at you and you got screwballs and you got curveballs and you got
Yeah.
fastballs, right? And you are responding with your social emotional skills to be as successful as possible. So we're all trying to hit the ball more effectively, right? But it's not like we're all going to be like, oh my gosh, why didn't it happen 70, 80% of the time? All
Sure.
these conditions matter, these different situations matter. And so, yeah, mastery is developing your ability to respond and problem solve as effectively as
Mm.
possible, right? Given all these conditions of stress and emotionality that happened yesterday, will happen tomorrow, and are happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question for you, and I want to go back to kind of just the optimistic view in the place I know where that we will get when we're all collaborating, we're all coming together to really progress this forward and support our schools. We've touched on bits and pieces of it. In your world, when every student is getting the ability to be taught these skills, when every educator and every leader has the capacity to create those environments, what does the future look like?
Hmm. I mean, so we have a future where, first of all, young people are thriving.
Mhm,
I want to name this idea when we talk about emotional development on the social side, sorry, on the emotional side. Um, I want our young people to be able to understand their emotions, um, and to respond effectively to their emotions. And this is on the
mhm,
mental health side. And when we struggle in those domains, our young people struggle. So
mhm,
I see a future where young people are thriving because they understand themselves, right?
mhm,
I understand my needs and emotions effectively. I see a future where we can have vigorous discourse across very difficult topics.
mhm.
And young people and adults, mostly, really, can manage to resolve those conflicts effectively and constructively, build something rather than destroy something.
Sure.
Um, I see a future where when folks are targeted in their emotions in order to be exploited, they are able to see that. They're able to identify the difference between a cognitive appeal and an emotional appeal.
Mm,
They're able to identify the emotion in themselves and the emotion that is looking to be generated so that they make better decisions, right?
mhm.
And then I think I see a future where, as a civil society, there are expectations that we have of each other that we meet.
Absolutely.
Um, that if something drops on a subway, that somebody picks it up. If we step on somebody's shoe, we can articulate our intention by saying I'm sorry, and then that moves that situation out. Where we're not resolving conflict with violence. Um,
Mm,
and again, look, it's a process. We are getting better. School violence
absolutely.
is down. School
Hmm.
bullying is down. This is Ron Astor's research over in UCLA. School violence is down. School climate is up. Our kids have a deeper sense of belonging. Our Black and brown students who had the highest exposure to school violence have less
Hmm.
exposure to school violence in 2025 than they did in
Mm,
2000. This work that is happening across the spectrum of SEL, school climate research, school violence research, PBIS, all these spaces are helping young people to better. So we just need to stay on that trajectory,
absolutely.
overcome the problems, solve for the challenges so that our young people can live that vision that we just talked about. And in 25 years from now, right, we'll have an even better conversation with them as they come up through our school systems as we develop them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree 100%. And I just want to thank you and the work you guys do at UA to be a voice of that, to be advocates for that, and to also be a real partner and support for helping make that happen. So, I agree with you. I think we're closer than further from seeing that reality, and then where it becomes an active part of what school looks like and what our world looks like moving forward. And it's thanks to people like yourself and organizations like yours. So thank you for taking the time. If people are listening to this and they want to explore more what UA is up to, what UA is committed to doing, what's the best way for them to either tap into UA or tap into you?
Well, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm at dadams@urbanassembly.org. You can hit me up on LinkedIn at David Adams. And you can check out our website, urbanassembly.org. You can request services for social emotional learning through our website. But you can also shoot me an email. I'll get right back to you. If you're interested in supporting all of your children and the whole child, the Urban Assembly is a partner for you.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for coming on the Come Home podcast.
Cheers, Chris. Thank you for having me.